Eileen Workman, is a co-founder of the Universe Project, and she spent 16 years working in the financial services industry, most recently as a first vice president of investments with a major Wall Street investment firm.
What we call economics is a for-profit, monetary, I've got to get mine kind of a system. What I'm suggesting is that rather than look at the world through an economic lens that is a monetary lens, that life is the lens that we need to be looking at the world through. That without life, nothing else matters. My heart had been closed down for many, many, many years. Is that we were all born into this system. None of us chose it. So we were born into it and indoctrinated into the belief that money was the resource that we all needed, and that in order for us to be successful or accomplish anything, we had to first get money. And it became this be-all and end-all in everybody's life. This is what we're out to do. We don't think about what am I going to bring to the world or how am I going to manifest the best part of myself to the world. It's I got to get a job. How am I going to make money? Because money is the conduit by which I get the things that I need. And this is a game that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And there are a multitude of problems with the game, not the least of which is the fact that money has no intrinsic value. I can't do a single thing with it unless I can convince you to take it off my hands so that you will give me something I can actually use. It's not a real resource. It's a way to convince other people to give you their resources in exchange for this thing we've created. So that we can all play this game of let me give you this fake stuff so I can get some real stuff from you. And the challenge that I put forth is can we step back from that for just a minute and look at what we're saying? We're saying we value this paper product that we're exchanging among ourselves more than we value the resources that we're decimating. And another thing I'll say about it is that because money is it's a relative process. It doesn't have any tangible value, so it's relative. The only way my money is valuable is if I have more of it than you do. Because if there's one item on the table and we both want it, if I have more money than you, it's mine. Let's make sure everybody has what they need. The gap in this country has never been as wide as it is today. Literally 10% of the people in this nation own 90% of this nation's wealth. So that means the other 90% of the people are fighting over 10% of the nation's wealth. And the system is structured to make sure they get more. That 10% gets more and more and more. We're cutting all the basic services, all the safety nets. We're cutting education, funding for teachers. And you take it to the extreme, and I heard Ann Coulter on TV the other day say that anyone that worked for the government was a drain on society. The assumption is if you're not doing a job that's generating a profit for somebody, you're useless. That's how far we've taken it. And I like to say, I liken that to the notion of, that would be like a man saying, my wife who's a homemaker, she's a useless drain on me because she's not generating a profit. But she's doing incredible things for that home. The government does the same thing. I mean, the government does the homemaking side of the nation. It makes sure that the water's clean. It makes sure that the land is taken care of. It makes sure the kids are educated. Everybody has a bed. The elderly and the sick are taken care of. It's doing the job of the homemaker. And we're denigrating that and making that into a bad thing because it's not generating money. In fact, it costs money. And the dad is the corporations. And right now he's beating his wife and making her look really bad in front of the children.
So, in essence, what I'm hearing is that the dad is the pimp.
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
bitch ain't bringing home the bucks.
Exactly. And so he's beating her up. The corporate, I mean, and again, now this goes. There's a deeper element here that's at play. But if you look at it, the corporation is playing the father role. The corporate environment's playing the daddy role. The government's playing the mommy role. And who are the kids? The citizenry. We're the children. And I think part of when we talk about this current evolution in consciousness, I think we're moving from a juvenile species into our young adulthood, to where we don't need to be kids anymore. We don't need mommy and daddy, and especially because they're fighting and that's not very pretty right now. We don't need them to take care of us anymore. What we need to do is step into the truth of our own adulthood and discover how to be self-governing. If you go all the way back to some of the earliest incarnations of money, when human beings became creative, and this was in the agrarian days, when we suddenly had surplus, we had the capacity to create more. And people began doing, I'll do pottery, and somebody else will do furniture, and this person over here is going to, do weavings or whatever. And as we tried to barter those things, it became more complicated to do a bartering thing. If you wanted to go 5 people down the line, and you wanted this thing, and the other person wanted that thing, and it didn't, you couldn't make the trade happen. Using money as a placeholder to value the things you were putting into the collective pot. You took your money out, and then you could go take something else out of the collective pot. That was the way it was supposed to work. And at that point, it didn't really matter what you used for money. It was simply a representation of the good or service you were offering into the whole. So that you put your thing in the hole, you take out your value, then you go get something else out of the hole. That was fine. As the world got more complicated and distances got greater and people began to produce more and more things, there was less of an amount of trust around what's the value of this thing that we're using to measure everybody's value that they're putting in. I don't know Johnny from 3 towns away. How do I know that he really got his money by putting something in the collective kitty? So let's use something that we all can control and we all can define, and that's very, very scarce, and that's where gold came into being. And they minted gold coins, and they made, they put faces on them, and everybody knew that that meant that the person had actually done something productive. So it was our way of checking and balancing, making sure people were genuinely productive if they were going to buy something out of the system. That was fine. But again, as the population exploded and we made more and more stuff, there wasn't enough gold available to monetize all the productivity of human creativity, because we're infinitely creative beings. And the more people who come into the world and are building on the creativity that's already been in existence, it begins to snowball. It mushrooms. So time goes by, more citizens do more things, and suddenly there's not enough gold. So what did we do? We said, well, let's just start to print promissory notes that the gold we mine in the future will be represented by this paper. And then we can put more stuff into the system so that we're not driving down the capacity of people to exchange things. Because that's really what money is. It's a currency. It's an energy flow of exchange. It's designed to facilitate the energy flow between people, so we can all produce to our maximum capacity and trade as good as possible, as freely as possible. So as that's going on, and human beings are now up to a couple of billion people, let's go back to the 70s, suddenly even the promissory notes became dangerous because people were turning them in for gold, and there wasn't enough gold to back the promissory notes, and we knew we couldn't mine enough gold in the future to back the promissory notes, so we just threw the gold away altogether and said, let's not even worry about gold, let's just make these promissory notes. So we'll just say that this is the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, whatever that means, and now we can make an unlimited amount of it. But we were making it not simply to monetize the goods and services that were in the system. We were producing the money and borrowing it from ourselves. This is where the first real break with reality came. We began to borrow money to create the capacity to produce the goods and services we were putting in the system so that we could then exchange them. And as we're borrowing money, and debt or money only comes into existence as debt. It doesn't exist any other way. It's loaned out, and that's how it comes into being. It's birthed as a loan. But we never loan the interest. We only birth the principal. So every loan that's ever made is made with principal plus interest. So when you add those two things together, what we wind up with is this enormous amount of money that gets produced, but nobody has the interest to pay it back because the interest doesn't exist. So if I'm going to pay back, if I take a loan from you and you charge me interest, I have to pay back the principal that I borrowed from you, plus I have to get somebody else's principal from somewhere else to add it and call that interest. And if I take principal away from somebody else, they still owe that principal back plus the interest on their own loan. So the more loans we produce, the deeper into debt we go. There's no way around it. It's an incredible hole that we dig for ourselves. So the more, and money is changing hands over and over again, and every time it changes hands as a loan with more interest attached. So right now, the amount of debt in the system far exceeds the amount of principal in the system. We've got a tremendous amount of interest that we all owe each other for the sake of borrowing, and there's no principal to cover it. So this is part of the problem, and that's how the whole debt system came into being. And to make matters worse, if we look at how the Federal Reserve works and how the banking system works, there's something called a 10% reserve requirement rule, which is the Federal Reserve lends money to banks. And when it lends that money, it allows the banks to lend out 9 times the amount that they borrow from the Federal Reserve. Well, they don't have it. It doesn't exist. So they digitize it by creating a mortgage, let's say, for somebody. So if they have $1 million they borrow from the Fed, they can lend out $9 million and keep that $1 million in their vault. And that's what they do. They make up $9 million out of thin air, and they charge interest on it. And so you're paying interest on invented money that was never borrowed from anybody. It was created by the banks. And they're lending this imaginary money to you at a high rate of interest. But if you default on it, they're going to take your very real possessions. That's the way it works. So it's kind of a crazy system, and we don't even understand it well enough to realize that we're being had by the banking system. The stock of the Federal Reserve is owned by private banks. Private banks have a guaranteed dividend as a result of the Federal Reserve. It does give some money to the federal government, but it is not beholden to the federal government in any way for its policies. In fact, its books are secret. Nobody really even knows who owns it. And the Federal Reserve came into being back, I think, in the 20s. And it was a result of the J.P. Morgans and the Rockefellers of the world who got together. The little cabal of them sat down and said, we need a private banking system to manage all these booms and busts that are happening. And the booms and busts weren't happening because of the money issue. They were happening because of capitalism itself, the problem with the underlying equation. And the irony is, and the sad thing is that what money was originally intended to do, which was to be a flow facilitator of human exchange, of productivity, of goods and services, it's now become a barrier. Because without money, I can't even begin to create a product. I don't have access to resources anymore unless I can pay for them. And how do I pay for them? I have to get money. How do I get money if I don't have any resources and I don't have any goods to sell in the open market? I have to borrow it. So I have to dig a hole to be able to become a productive citizen, to climb back up to the ground, and then hopefully get up in the tree. It's an insane setup. That's why kids go into $100,000 in debt before they even get out of college. They're digging the hole so that they can become productive members of society. I say, why don't we just start at the ground? Why do we have to dig the hole first? Why are we putting every single human being alive on the planet today through the agony of having to dig a hole and climb out? And the deeper you dig, the higher you've got to climb. But that's the way we've structured our system. It's absurd. I don't think anything we should do on evolutionary is regressive. So I don't believe we want to go back to a barter system or back to an old way. I want to find a way through and a way forward. And to me, the way forward really starts from a higher level of consciousness. Mm-hmm. It starts from the recognition that at heart, we're all connected, and that anything that I do to elevate you and enable you and empower you as a human being benefits me.
All right.
And anything that I do to make your life harder or diminish it in any way diminishes me as a human being.
Yeah.
Starting from that place is a really helpful place to begin. And I think this notion that we've all attached to is this idea that we have to get something out of life, that we're here to get. And that's part of the capitalistic system. What's a for-profit paradigm? I profit at your expense. I take something that has a certain tangible value and I give it to you or sell it to you and take more than it's worth. That's what a profit is. I'm treating you as a means to an end.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing you as an end unto yourself. I'm not honoring you.
No.
You're a means for me to get wealthy. I don't even care what I sell you.
You're capitalizing on me.
I'm capitalizing on your need. And in fact, that's how the system works. It capitalizes on people's needs. We've designed a system that's so integrated now and so advanced technologically that people can't get by without money. You used to be able to. 100 years ago, if you didn't like living in the city, you just go out into the woods, you stake a claim, you build your little log cabin, and you could live perfectly well. You can't do that anymore. You have property taxes. There's no free land. How long can you live without having cash in your pocket to fund the system? Because the system is always picking your pocket. You have utility bills. How are you going to run your iPod? You can't run these things for free.
Right.
So rather than freeing ourselves up to be more creative and be more social and be more loving and be more engaged, we're enslaving ourselves to the need to earn money, to pay our bills, to live. And that feeds the system, which is all about for-profit, but it's harmful to the human condition. It's not what we really want to do. And so now what are you going to do? The safety net goes away and there's no job for you.
Yeah.
And it sort of Well, too bad. That's the way that the system is working. And I would challenge that at every turn. The system is not designed, or it was designed, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be focused entirely on making money. We should be making money, if we're making money, to better the human condition. What the internet enables us to do, which is the most phenomenal thing that the internet has to offer, is, the whole notion of a business enterprise is matching buyers and sellers, product and resources, and putting these things together. And in a very, very large, unconnected world, that was hard to do. But with the internet, I can now match directly with, I can put my book and I can talk to people who want to buy it. I don't have to go through these giant publishing behemoths who take the biggest piece of the pie for themselves.
Right. That's my point.
They're cutting out the seller and they're screwing the buyer, and they're taking all this profit for themselves simply for the sake of making the marriage.
Right.
We can make the marriage ourselves on the internet now. We don't need the behemoth.
Right.
So we can render them irrelevant. We don't even have to fight with them anymore. We can make them irrelevant.
Exactly.
And that's what's happening.
Yes.
Banking is the one industry where that has not happened yet. And I'm going to put this out there for anybody who wants to start their own business and become the next billionaire. The first person who does an internet banking system where they match borrowers and lenders for really reasonable rates, and they bypass the banking system altogether by using the internet sort of like an eBay for buyers, for lenders and borrowers, so that you can fund people's creativity and bring that genius to market, and the people who have money and don't know what to do with it and are tired of losing it in the stock market want to go play that game. I swear that's going to be an enormous business. Nobody has stepped into that breach yet. They've stepped into the breach in the internet and other services, but that's one that hasn't been tapped, and it'll be phenomenal when somebody steps in and does that. Crisis precedes transformation, and that typically the tools that you need become available as you need them. And I think what the internet is, it's going to be the tool that will help us through the chaos of the inevitable collapse, because the collapse is inevitable. The basic underlying contract of the current capitalist for-profit paradigm is that as an individual, you take your man hours, your energy. It's about the energy. You take your energy, you sell it to a business. That business gives you capital, which you then use to buy the collective fruits of human labor. And that's been the contract for thousands of years. But what's happened in the last couple of 100 years particularly is the acceleration of the industrial age and technology and computerization and productivity gains. All of that says we need less and less human energy to build the things that we all need and that we're all using. So that breaks down the contract. Add to that, now you've got 7 billion people trying to sell their energy into a system that doesn't need it anymore, or needs very little of it. And you've got a huge problem, because what is it that bought the goods and services was the wages of the people that were working. Machines don't earn wages, and they don't use goods.
Right.
So, you look at that and you see the paradigm is broken down, and because corporations tap into the free market, if you look at the global free market for energy right now, human energy, they can immigrate anywhere they want to go in the world. I'll immigrate to China if I'm IBM. I'll immigrate to India if I'm Apple. And I can tap into a very, very cheap labor pool. But you, as a person, you can't follow that job.
Right.
You're not allowed to immigrate. So you're stuck here, surrendering your job to that cheaper labor force, which is a very small part of what, most of Apple and those other companies are all technologically machine-oriented anyway. So the jobs are gone. Here's the irony, is that for the last probably 50 or 60 years, the only thing that's kept the illusion of corporate profitability alive is the fact that the government has been creating safety nets and social programs and subsidies, and they're funding billions and billions, trillions of dollars into the economy, putting it into the pockets of the unemployed, the underemployed, the elderly, people who are poor, and that money goes right into corporate coffers because those people need stuff. So they buy stuff, the company makes it, and the government's paying for it. And that's what's been keeping the illusion of corporate profitability afloat. Yeah. So the irony now is, what are we talking about doing? Cutting government spending. The minute you cut government spending, the illusion will be revealed for what it is, because nobody has any money.
Right.
And what is the government? This is the other funny part. Where does the government get its money? It taxes wages.
Right.
What's collapsing?
Right.
Wages.
That's
that's why the government's borrowing money. That's why it's going into debt.
Right.
It's trying to fund all these programs to keep the citizens alive. Not thriving, just alive.
Yeah.
And it's borrowing that money, and now the business interests are saying, we can't keep doing this, it's not profitable. They're so disconnected from the understanding of their own system, they don't even see that.
Right.
They have no idea that when they force the government to stop spending money and stop taxing, that the whole thing's going to collapse. They're killing themselves, and they don't even know it. And it knows what it's doing.
Yes.
And it is evolving to a higher order.
Right.
It's changing us inside at the same time that we're faced with these enormous problems on the outside, so that we can deal with the problems.
Right.
But it's giving us a choice. Evolve or die. It's a very simple choice. One of the tenets that I see happening is that probably since we've existed, human beings have existed, in order for us to change, we've had to be repulsed by something. Again, energetic repulsion. This is so bad, I have no choice but to change. And I think because consciousness is expanding and human awareness is growing and the interconnectivity is becoming more apparent, what's going to be happening is we're moving toward an attractor field. Rather than me having to be kicking and screaming forced out of the current way of doing things, I'll be okay with what we're doing, but I'll be able to say, hey, let's try that because that might work better.
Yeah.
Let's go forward.
Right.
So I think we're on the edge of that shift too, and that this may be the final experience that we have to go through, where we're forced because we have no choice to change, and we're going to move into the capacity to change choicefully. Collectively design our grandest vision of our highest version of ourselves and aim for that. Instead of simply reacting to the things that aren't working,
right.
Coming to a place and saying, this is what we need to do. And then you're not clinging anymore. You're reaching forward. And that gives us the momentum to flow with creation, to move with the impulse of evolution, and to step into the flow of cosmic design. Whereas if we're trying to cling to the past and fixate on it and rigidly hold on to it, it doesn't mean there aren't things in the past that aren't wonderful and that shouldn't be carried forward. But we carry so much baggage forward that we're weighting ourselves down, and we're going to drown if we don't let go. We have to run our society the way we run a family. I don't let my kids come to the table and say, okay, there's a steak here. Who's got the biggest allowance? And the teenager says, I'll take the steak, give Johnny the baby the potato skin.
Right.
As a mother, I wouldn't run my house that way. Why would I run a world that way? There are two things that we have been taught to believe that I think are utterly false, that make it hard for us to buy into that. The first thing that we're taught to believe is that there's never going to be enough to go around. That if we all try to give things away, we're going to get taken advantage of, and there's never going to be enough to go around. The second thing we've been taught to believe is that if people aren't working for money, for reward, they won't work at all. And those are the two underlying, I say, false beliefs that make us afraid to let go of the monetary system and the need to measure and make sure that, I got to make sure you're putting your work in the middle. I don't trust you to actually work if you're taking stuff. And you might take too much. I'm afraid you're going to take too much. So there's a lack of trust in each other, and that has been exacerbated by the capitalist system, which is all about trying to get more from you than I'm really supposed to. That's how I profit. So we've fostered that lack of trust in the system, and it's time we turn that around. We have to learn to trust each other. If we're going to work together, we have to learn to cooperate. We've got enormous problems as a species that we're facing, extinction-level problems, and the only way we can fix those is if we work together, not compete, but work together to really address those fundamental issues. And I think the economy is one of the first places we have to start to turn things around, because it's creating a lot of the problems. So to me, that's the linchpin. If we can fix how we're doing business with each other, change the nature of our relationship and how we're working together, then we're free to change the world. If I had to define one of the most freeing moments of my life, it was the moment after my spiritual breakdown and breakthrough when I quit my job. And it's what you were talking about, how much does one really need? In that moment, I had to walk away from all the security, my future, my retirement account, my stock. I had all this stock and stock options, and I had to surrender all of that. And the question I asked myself very seriously is, if I have to spend the rest of my life doing this, I'm going to die. But the option, if I don't spend the rest of my life doing this, is I may have to eat out of dumpsters. Could I do that for the sake of my freedom? And the answer I finally came to was yes. If I have to be a bag lady and live on the streets and eat out of dumpsters, I would rather live that way than spend another day living the way that I'm living. And in that moment, I was free.